I'm Hillary Lane, and today we're coming to you from First Watch, the fastest growing full service restaurant company in America. Chris, tell me a little bit about First Watch and what sets it apart in the crowded restaurant industry.
We've been around for over 40 years. We're open from 7 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. We don't have heat lamps, deep fryers, or microwaves in our restaurants. We make everything fresh to order.
Chris, I can't believe it's almost 3 p.m. and there are no employees here. Tell me about your no nights ever philosophy.
The quality of life that we offer is incredible. We have folks that can be home every night with their families and have that work-life balance that everybody talks about and seeks.
And it's their commitment to their employees and customers that's landed First Watch at the top spot of the most loved workplace list by the Best Practice Institute for the second year in a row.
When First Watch started with our two co-founders, I mean, that was just their kind of, North Star was just, hey, we'll teach you how to flip eggs and do inventory and do schedules, but really when it comes down to it, we just need to be kind to each other and our customers.
There are more than 600 First Watch restaurants in 32 states. Looking ahead, First Watch plans to grow by an average of 10% per year to 2,200 restaurants nationwide.
That was today's Business Minute. We'll see you next time.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Scott Bax, the head of research for Most Loved Workplace, and welcome to our first webinar of 2026 on the important topic, the risk of regrettable retention. I'm excited to introduce our presenters today and our facilitators. First off, I want to introduce our CEO and founder of Best Practice Institute, Lewis Carter. Lou is the author of In Great Company, the book that described the research around Most Loved Workplace, and the creator of the Love of Workplace Index. And I'm really excited to welcome Laura Sorensen, the Chief People Officer of First Watch Restaurant, who also was the #1 Most Loved Workplace for 2024 and 2025. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Lou and take it away.
Hey, everybody, mute there. Okay. That's even better. So, Laura, it's wonderful to see you. It's great to be here today with everybody on this topic. And who better to talk about this than Laura and the #1 most loved workplace in America, First Watch, right? Laura, welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, so anyway, I'll go ahead and talk this way. So with this today, it's about, Laura, we're talking about regrettable retention. It's a Gartner topic, right? They call it regrettable retention, and it's a very simple topic. It's kind of interesting concept, right? So we always think about retention as a win. Typically, people think retention is we have to achieve retention, but the research behind LOWE, suggests there's a difference. Love Workplace Index is saying basically that, there's a difference between committed employees and those who are simply comfortable. And we call this voluntary discretionary effort when it comes to our research. And we're showing that things like organizational citizenship behavior and effective commitment, which means basically you really love being there, right? And people really love being and working at First Watch, right? So, that we think of it, here's another way of looking at it is, there's a concept in social psychology, it's called social loafing, right? People come in and they work on and they stand on the coattails of others, and they're not fully committed into a culture. And those aren't quite the ones we want to retain, right? And so companies often give bonuses and structures and all these financial incentives just to retain everyone across the board, rather than looking at those who really contribute to the culture, right? And we've all known people who sometimes they don't contribute to the culture, and those are the people and they actually harm the culture. Those are the ones we don't necessarily want to keep in the culture, or we want to help improve to bring into the culture and become part of the community. Now, First Watch has all their own ways of doing all of this, and it doesn't have regrettable retention because it's such a consistent, cohesive culture, with the values being core to everyone who is recruited, as well as everybody who's in the restaurant. I can attest to that. I've done some visits and spoken directly with staff, and I can say definitively that they are all committed to the staff and structure. So what I want to talk about is, you consistently score high on Spark, especially in respect and killer achievement, which is really related to this concept of regrettable retention, because being given respect for the contributions that people make, as well as respect for employer for giving the opportunity, which is very much true at First Watch, and killer achievement really enabling outcomes and results and ensuring that people do achieve what needs to be achieved. So we'd love to hear how you've built that workplace where people feel respected, right? And also have the chance to thrive.
Thank you, Lou. So many interesting concepts you threw out there. So first of all, when I think about just how we've built this culture, it really started with our founder over 40 years ago. You heard Chris talk a little bit about it in the video. But he was just he recently passed away, but such an amazing visionary who truly cared about people and just set up this amazing organization. When I came to First Watch, I was the first chief people officer, and there were so many times where I tried to figure out how is it so that we have these, engaged, committed employees. They're all working towards the same thing. But in the absence of all of the fancy tools that you just talked about, because it was a small, fast growing company. And for me, when I evaluated it really came down to the fact that he was very smart. He had great instincts on the business. And he was very collaborative and worked well and brought people together. Played well with others. And above all else, he was just really, really kind. And so I think he looked for people who were like him. I think when you're like that and you're really kind and you want to work well with others and connect with others and create great things, you're just naturally able to spot that in others. Somebody who's a social loafer would have really stood out in that type of model. And so I think that he just created this wonderful concept that was built on delivering a wonderful experience and consistently great food to our customers. But even more than that, it was about creating this amazing work experience and environment for our employees. And they had, when I first came to the business, I was coming from a much bigger organization. So I asked about the mission and the vision and the values and, the core principles and the beliefs. And I wanted to learn all of these things so that I could really understand the culture. And every time I asked a question on, what is this? What is that? I'd get the same answer of just you first. And then finally I said, well, what does this you first mean? And both Ken, our founder, and Chris said, well, we don't really have a definition for it, but you'll know it when you see it. And they were right. I did know it when I saw it. I felt it. As the organization grew, as we started entering into more states that were further away from the core, we realized that we needed to actually articulate it better because we were bringing all these new people into the system. And so we couldn't just rely on them seeing it and feeling it. We knew that feeling was out there, but we also knew that we really needed to crystallize exactly what we meant. So we developed then our new mission, our new vision, our new values. And so it was about clearly communicating these to our teams, giving them that framework, giving them freedom in the framework, which I think demonstrates that respect to them, and then measuring it using great tools like you have with the Most Loved Index to make sure that we're delivering on that experience for our employees. So when I think about regrettable retention, I think, because we're moving so fast and we're so proud of what we created. Again, I think somebody who doesn't want to be here would stick out like a sore thumb. But I think before we even looked at, why is that? And do we need to move them out of the organization? We'd look at what could we do better? I think we'd hold up the mirror to ourselves, or we should be. Because I don't think anybody wakes up in the morning or, applies for a job so that they can be a social loafer. I think at the end of the day, people want enjoyment and satisfaction and meaning in the work that they do and in the lives that they create. Work is such a big part of our lives. So I think people want to come in and contribute and do a great job. So if they're not feeling like that, if it does feel like they're just coming in and punching a clock and not contributing or connecting, have we failed them? Is there something more that we can be doing? And so I think a lot of it just starts with asking the right questions, talking to those individuals. And sometimes there may be a disconnect and something we can fix. And sometimes it may be a disconnect where we realize it's just not a right match.
When I'm hearing you talk, I can hear how it all starts with you first, you, the leader, right? And that's what emanates into your culture is this belief, this living that you are living this truth of you first, people first, right? And that becomes even more important as a life of service, of servant leadership, if you will. It's part of what we do. And I like how you also said how we meet you where you're at. If you're going through something or something that you might be thinking or feeling, I want to know what it is and want to bring you back to being with us in you first. And so you took a lot of intentional steps to do that. And so let's talk about that balance, how you built that balance into your culture, right? Because you really are talking about a balance between, some people have bad days, right? Some people go through challenging times in their life. And while others perhaps don't have that many challenges in their lives, right? So I want to pick up on that, and because your model isn't just flexible, right? It's structured for love. And I want to tell you what I mean by that, because there's no nights, real balance, predictable schedules, you first. So tell me what the intentional steps you took in addition to that inside of the culture to embed it so people can really figure out this is what I could do too.
Mm-hmm. So first of all, when I think about some people maybe, having bad days or off days or, tough things they're dealing with, we're primarily working with a hourly frontline workforce. That's who makes up the majority of our employees. We have about 18,000 employees across the country, over 600 restaurants, as you know. And so again, the majority of those employees are in the restaurants. We have a small home office to support those employees, and our whole job is really making sure that we can help them do their job to the best of their abilities. But with that hourly workforce, I've got to assume that many of them are coming from hard days and hard situations. They may have had other jobs closed to them, other doors closed, and so they may be taking a job with us. And we do a lot of work with our managers to make sure that we're maximizing those opportunities. So even somebody who came in just thinking they're taking a job, we have the opportunity to turn that into a career, which is great for the employee. It's also great for us with our growth right now. But we realize in these situations, so much comes down to the manager and that experience between the manager and the employee. So we're very intentional about the training and development that we offer our managers. We're very intentional about the culture that we strive to create, and our managers are the ambassadors for that. So we actually just had our annual conference just a couple weeks ago, where we brought all of our general managers from across the country together to talk about really culture, the business, but the culture piece of it is evident in everything that we do at conference. One of the things that I always talk to them about is that they all have the privilege of not being able to just impact somebody's livelihood by, offering them promotions and helping them get to the next level. So it's not just changing livelihoods. It's really they're in the business of changing lives. Again, they can open doors to these individuals that may have been previously closed. They can take somebody who's been a dishwasher. I always like to say we're the only industry where you can go from the dish room to the boardroom. Our president and CEO, Chris Tomaso, started out not at First Watch, but at a different company as a dishwasher. And we have so many individuals who start in those roles, and we can help them work up. The sky is the limit there. So I think a lot of it starts with, what kind of company do we want to be? What do we value? And then how can we make sure that our managers are ambassadors of that and have those same values and are bringing that to life in their restaurant. We can put out the values, but we need them to bring it to life in their own unique way with their own teams in their own restaurants.
Yeah, that comes loud and clear when you visit a First Watch restaurant, and one of the things that had also uh, sort of impacted me when I spoke with your staff was that you support their whole life, right? I spoke to a one of the wait staff. She's auditioning for American Idol. The other one had great interest in pets and adopting pets and nonprofit for pets, and they supported each other in that way, right? And their work-life balance also is very supported in terms of your the structure you set up, right? And it comes through. It's almost as if you've created a community within a community, right? And so I want to hear a little bit more about that because there's obviously career advancement, which is extremely beneficial in a high turnover industry, right? And for also work-life balance, so that you've embedded in your foundation that definitely impacts employee commitment. And this, which helps with emotional connectedness. So, you know, how do you see that impacting employee commitment? Your intentional work around work-life balance as a perk, especially in such a high turnover industry such as yours.
Yeah, so when I think about our employer value proposition and what we're providing to our employees, it's really all about our culture, our growth opportunities, and the flexibility and work-life balance that we provide them. And so we take a lot of steps to ensure that even though that's what we say we're delivering, that is in fact what we're delivering to our people. And so again, there's tools like the most loved index that we use, but we also just talk to our employees to make sure that we're delivering on that experience, just like you did when you went into the restaurant to see what is their experience like? What does it feel like to work at First Watch? And we take great pride in that. We learned from our people really what our value proposition was because we heard from them time and time again that they come to us for the hours, for that flexibility, but they stay for the people and those connections. And so we're quite fortunate that we close at 2:30, so we only have one shift. And so again, I'm in like a people leader's dream in the restaurant industry with that one shift because if they refer their best friend to work for us, for example, they're working with that friend every day. Where in most concepts, you have a 3-shift model where you can refer someone to work with you and you might not see them because it's just a bigger concept. There's more chefs. These are smaller teams that are working next to each other day in and day out. And that really helps to foster this connection and this collaborative environment. We've always been told by our employees that we should never say the word family, that the company shouldn't say that. But every time we talk to our employees and ask them to describe our culture and our environment, they always say it feels like a family because we take care of each other. I think it means a lot more when it's coming from the employees, that word, than when it's coming from the company. So again, it's not ever coming from us, but again, we're quite fortunate that we have that one shift model. I realize that not a lot of companies are able to have that just because of the hours. And so I think for those companies, then it's about creating an environment where people want to be. So I know people talk about work-life balance and it always sounds so binary. It kind of assumes like one is good and one is bad. So you have to balance them out. Where I think it's really about making sure that when people are at work, they can enjoy what they're doing and they enjoy who they're doing it with. So it doesn't feel like something that's bad. It doesn't feel like a burden. Rather, it feels like an opportunity. And for our leaders, they're the ones who have the privilege of leading these individuals and providing these opportunities.
And when you eat at First Watch restaurants, you'll feel that from the staff, and I think that's part of the meal is this experience as a community, right? And Spark is that's what it's about, is that connection, right? And it's about really developing a connection between founder, leadership, vision, and the vision of other people inside of the corp or the company, and connecting those values, right? So what I also want to know is, in the event when you see or detect, right, that someone might be losing that connection, right? It speaks a little bit to regrettable retention. Like when you see it, you know, even when they're not raising their hand, right? How do you detect that? And what do you do to sort of jump in? You talked a little bit about your leadership development, management development training. So tell me, like, how do you detect it? And then how do you, even if they're not raising their hand, right?
I have found that they rarely do raise their hand unless it's in the form of, a resignation letter, and it's at the very end, and it's maybe too late, and that could have been a missed opportunity and a individual that could have done really great things. But I think in most cases, when you have somebody who is disengaged and they're staying in place, but they're stagnant and not contributing, I think when you've got the right leaders in place, they're able to spot it right away. And I think when you've got the right leaders in place, it's not just the leader, it's their coworkers who can feel it too. Because when somebody's not contributing to the team and pulling their own weight, because you've got this sense of accountability and accomplishment on the team. And you can't do that and achieve what you set out to achieve when there's one person who's not really operating at that same level. And so I think, if I think about specifics of how do you spot that, again, I think at the frontline level, the hourly employees are able to tell because somebody's not contributing as much and maybe not doing as much of their side work or pitching in, or they're not doing it with the same enthusiasm that the other employees are. Sometimes it's on a more personal level where you have people that just don't want to share, or they're not as communicative with their partners. For me in the home office, I think that I can tell when I see somebody who's leaving exactly at 5 o'clock. That's always a flag for me. Now, I can tell you it's an unfair flag, Lou. And so when I see it, I have to make sure that I'm looking into it further and asking questions, because in some cases you could have somebody that needs to pick up a child right at 5:20. And so they know they've got to leave at that exact time in order not to incur any expenses at the daycare by going over. But if it's somebody who doesn't have a set plan like that, and it's more just they're watching the clock, they're only going to do the bare minimum, then it's something that we need to be concerned with. But I think again that the big things are people who just, look to really do the bare minimum, not go above and beyond, don't feel that sense of connection with their coworkers. And it's tough because we're in a time now where we've got all of these great tools with technology and AI. And when we all went through COVID together, it opened up the doors on remote work. And we know that our people craved flexibility. And it was interesting here watching how that played out at the home office, because we first of all, we didn't go out with a severe policy, because I started to draft one about remote work. And in drafting a policy on flexibility, I realized I'm sort of taking out the flexibility by just creating all these rules around it, right? So instead we said, we're just going to be intentionally flexible. We know that's what people want. And so we're going to let leaders lead and determine what works best for their own area. And so for most of them, it was a day or two working from home, but there was one area where they really felt like they needed to provide individuals with more than that. So they allowed people to work 5 days remote and give them full flexibility. And again, people were saying, we want this flexibility. This is what we crave the most. But when we did our live engagement tour with each team in the home office, we realized that on the teams where people had the opportunity to connect more live and in the office together, again, they still had flexibility, but they were here more often. those teams were truly committed and connected, and they talk so much about the culture. And when I talked to them about what do you like the most about working here, hands down, they all said the culture. When I talked to the one team that had more flexibility and had many people working 5 days remote and talked about what do you like the most here, they said, we love the flexibility that we have. So that there was that. But when I said, what do you like the least? They said, we don't feel like we have the culture and the connection that we see these other teams have within the organization. And so it's quite a conundrum, right? Figuring out how to walk that line to provide people with the flexibility they need while knowing that these interpersonal connections are really, the spark that we need in a culture like ours, especially in hospitality.
Critical. And you've logged 150 hours listening to over 1,500 employees through your Y tours. You're speaking to that right now. And it's sort of the question of, doing well, doing better, right? What can you do better? And you listen to it and you do something about it, which is different than what other people do. We talk about this concept again of it's a concept of inaction fatigue. There's no such thing as survey fatigue. There's only inaction fatigue, right? So if we survey people and don't do anything about it, or listen to people and don't do anything about it, that's a lot different, right? So basically, that types of FaceTime, it connects directly to systemic collaboration, respect, and spark. And I just want to put that together is that, Laura does the work on this, putting in the work and doing these Y tours, not an easy thing to do. They invest in it and they do it intentionally. So what surprised you in these conversations? A lot of conversations, right? To have, and how do you make sure people know that input led to action?
So every year we do these Y tours. The Y is an acronym that stands for We Hear You. It's myself, my CEO and president, and our chief operations officer. And so we gather about 24 employees from each regional area across the country so that every area in the country is represented. And then for 90 minutes straight, we just have these open conversations with them about what's working well and what's not working so well. So we open up every conversation by usually saying, what do you like the most about working at First Watch? What do you like the least about working at First Watch? This year, we started it off with, why did you come to First Watch? And why do you stay at First Watch? And at one point, we had a question thrown in there. If you ever left, why do you think that would be? And so what always surprises me, and it's so reassuring, though, just on people and connection, is it's the little things. The little things, as you know, Lou, are always the biggest things. And so when we say, what do you love about First Watch? They always talk about the culture. It's the number one thing that we hear. And then we hear about the hours, the flexibility, and we hear about the growth opportunities, which is great because, again, it ties back to that employer value proposition. If I heard different things about what they love the most, I'd have to think about, are we positioning this the right way? Because I think we're giving something different to our employees than we actually set out to, and maybe we should reevaluate it. But again, those line up well. But when I start to ask for examples of, so why do you feel so strongly about the culture? Why do you describe it like a family? Why does it feel so good to you? The things that and we do so many things, by the way, there are so many examples I could give you and things that I look at that I think are innovative or different or, fun and exciting. And they will consistently tell me things like, oh, every morning our managers say good morning to us. And I used to ask them, like, oh my goodness, is this, is this not something you've had in every other workforce? Because it was just so surprising that it stood out to them. But then you realize it's not, right? And for some people, they say good morning is one thing. They say my manager asks how I'm doing. And then you realize that for some of these people, that manager may be the only person the entire day that asks how they're doing. Now, the key, of course, is not just that they ask how they're doing, but that they genuinely care in the answer and that they listen. And again, I think we've done so much as an organization to foster a culture and enable one where our managers have the time to listen to their employees, but they also know it's one of the most important things they'll do throughout the entire day. because that drives everything else. So I think when they ask how they are, it's not transactional. It is truly because they genuinely care. And if somebody said, you know what, I'm not doing well today, I'm not having a great day, I have full confidence that our managers would sit down with that person, listen to it, and help them think about what can we do next so that you're feeling better, either about work or about home, whatever it is. But again, I think the most surprising thing every year, even though I hear the same thing, is just that it's always these really small things. And it all boils down to that individual connection, usually between the manager and the employee, and then to some degree between the employees and the other employees, and then also between the employees and the customers. Our employees feel so good about the work that they do that they'll often say the customers are one of their favorite things too, because they want to do a great job. They want to give so much to the customer. And as a result, we end up with customers who come in giving Christmas presents and holiday gifts to our employees. They watch their children grow up. And so they're just meaningful parts of their lives many times.
You said it. You said it all. You've given so much great information to people. And there's a last question, very last question for today. And this speaks to, it kind of puts you on the hot seat here. It's basically saying, as someone who's led the number one America's Most Loved Workplace for 2 years running in a row, right? What advice would you give to leaders, CHROs, right? Leaders who are still chasing engagement and satisfaction rather than emotional connectedness?
I think first they need to think about just what type of organization they want to be. What's the employee experience that they're aiming for? How do they want people to experience the work? Then I think it's communicating out some of this framework, and then making sure that you measure it. So, I know with real estate they talk about location, location, location. I think for us it's listen, listen, listen. I think some of our best ideas come from our people. And so if I sit down at the beginning of the year as a chief people officer and think about what are the most important things that we need to do, I mean, I can come up with different ideas all day long. The most impactful ideas are going to be the ones that I get from our employees, though. When I ask them, what can we do to make your jobs easier? That's the kind of thing that can move mountains in a workforce, as long as we take that feedback and we act upon it, and then we let our employees know that we're doing something about it. So I'd recommend listening to your employees to get some of your best ideas, putting those ideas into motion, and then letting the workforce know what you've done with their feedback.
Outstanding. It's all outstanding. Laura, this is awesome. Congratulations on all of your accomplishments. And this is just a wonderful interview, wonderful understanding, and appreciate you being with us here today. Scotty, take it over.
Well, thanks
Thank you, Will.
everybody for joining, and thank you so much, Laura, for everything. I always learn a lot from hearing from you, and I really loved how you said, to Lou earlier, when somebody feels disconnected, your first question isn't what's wrong with them, but rather what could we be doing better? And that's really the crux of what Most Loved Workplace is. So for everybody else, to follow what Laura is doing, go to mostlovedworkplace.com. You can do your Love a Workplace Index, find out where disconnection is, and ask yourself, what could we be doing better? That's how you become the number one most loved workplace. Thanks, everybody, and
Thank
have a
you.
great rest of the day.